Welcome to the Way We Capture podcast. This is a podcast that is dedicated to photography and aims to provide guidance and support to individuals looking to improve their photography skills. The podcast focuses on self-development and also discusses the future of technology and image processing. Through the podcast, listeners can learn about various techniques, tools, and resources to enhance their creativity and productivity. The podcast also explores the creative process behind capturing stunning photographs and how to effectively communicate through photography and storytelling. This week's guest is Lacy. Alex is a music producer, advertising graduate, and public speaker, and also a damn good friend of mine. Let's get right into this week's episode, A Passion for Storytelling. Welcome to the Way We Capture podcast. I'm your host, Zachariah Rock. This week's episode, I have a special guest. Just did a bit of an introduction for him, so I will let our guest Alex here describe who he is and what he does in his own words.
Hey, I am a music producer, content creator, advertising major, and I love building community. My big thing is communication right now and storytelling, so I'm super hyped about that.
Love to hear that, man. You and I have a bit of history for the audience listening. Alex and I go way back, since I think he was about 13. What are you now, 22 right now?
22, about to be 23, so almost
So
10
almost
full
10
years.
years.
Yeah, 10
Almost
full
10 full
years.
years, dude. So Alex recently has just, he got on a podcast. What was that? The Creative Prevail podcast,
Creatives
if I remember
prevail.
right.
Yep.
Yeah, Creatives Prevail, where he spoke to a awesome podcast host. I listened to all of it the other day, and
Shout out to
I just have to
Michael
say,
Zimmerlich.
yeah,
He's incredible.
yeah, I just have to say, Alex is one of the most well-spoken people from our hometown, in my opinion. He's always been the face of gratitude and empathy with people around him, and he is a very upbeat, down-to-earth kind of guy who just wants to see everybody succeed. So, anyways, we'll move on to a little bit of Alex's story. So, Alex, how did you get your start into music production? Excuse me.
I I appreciate that, bro. That really means a lot. My intro to music production, actually, I have to start in 2009 when Michael Jackson first died, because I saw a lot of videos of him dancing and performing on the news. I was like, hey, that looked pretty dope. So I decided to throw down a few moves, and you remember this. Then I really started getting into dancing in like middle school and then later in high school. And you were throwing down moves right there
Yeah.
with me, bro. Those were
Oh, we don't talk about that.
yes, we. Nah, I'm playing.
Alex taught me how to dance
Nah, dude,
indirectly.
you were throwing down some incredible stuff. Anyway, um, I was doing that for a long time, and then I kind of realized, hey, dancers don't make a whole lot of money. That's okay. There are some that do, and they make a ton of money. Chances are getting that probably not the greatest. So I asked myself the question, do I love to dance, or do I love music so much that I dance? And I decided it was the latter, and said, hey, there's a lot of flexibility that can come with this love of music. Let me try production. And so I did, and I saw a documentary on the evolution of hip hop on Netflix called Hip Hop Evolution. And there was one episode introducing New York State of Mind by Nas. And that one episode made me go, this looks sweet. So I decided to get into it and was kind of playing around with some different genres, like a little bit of EDM, a little bit of trap in the very beginning. And then in 2020, October 2020, I bought an MPC, which is, if you see on Instagram those people with the pads, like drumming on those 16 pads, the 4x4s,
Yeah.
that is what an MPC is. And so I got one, found that I loved using it for production, and haven't looked back.
I love that, man. I was listening to the other podcast, and the one thing I've noticed about you is you have refined your story to the point where you know exactly who you are and where you're going. And I love that because that is something that a lot of people struggle with, is being able to tell their own story, and every single time it's the exact same. And the more you tell it, like, you could be screaming from the bleachers for like 100 years telling the exact same story, and it makes you so uniquely you. And oh, chills, bro. I could tell Alex Hormozy has had an effect on you.
Oh, 100%, dude. 100%.
Because
That
the
man is
way you just
incredible.
delivered that timeline of dancing into understanding the kind of the harsh reality of the world, like, there's a lot of depth there where you're like, I love this, but I can't survive off this.
Mhm.
And those who do survive off of this are in like the top 0.0000001%.
Mhm.
And so that's a harsh reality to overcome. And I'm sure you've learned lots of lessons from it. But I really want to speak about your passion for storytelling, because a lot, like, I've seen all the new content you've been doing on Instagram. Sometimes, I'll engage with it, try to, but the busyness of life and the hyper productivity that we send ourselves into in terms of being efficient through and through and optimizing, we get caught up in it, right? Like, you don't interact with everything I do. I don't interact with
Yeah.
everything you do. But the rawness of our friendship comes from the ability to support even when we haven't talked to each other in months. Picking back
Facts.
up,
Yup.
picking back up right from the bottom, bringing it to the top. So with your storytelling ability, I've just noticed it grow. I think it was the first time I hopped on your podcast. That was over a year ago.
Yeah.
That was something like, yeah, the Resolution. Check out the Resolution podcast.
Yeah, I need to pick that back up again. But yeah,
You do, brother.
storytelling, oh dude, it's I mean, we hear stories all throughout our lives and we hear about storytelling is great, but I didn't know the gravity of that statement until probably earlier this year of how stories, I would argue, make up who we are and how we see ourselves is based on the stories that we tell ourselves. That's a big theme, and that's something I'm really trying to check myself on a daily basis. Like, what are my moments where I'm looking for evidence that support the story that I'm telling myself? Is the evidence that I'm looking for productive or destructive? Is it leading me to a better place or taking me back to where I don't want to go? So stories are everything. And to the point that you made about me knowing my story, the cool thing about telling the same story over and over is that you get to refine it and you get to try different
Yes.
techniques. Like, oh, let me say that in a little different way. Let me say with a different inflection here, because it just changes the meaning, and how you deliver it becomes the story that you do tell.
Your story is a breath of fresh air because of brevity behind it. You don't. So I always struggle telling my story because I'm like, oh, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. It's so complex, and I try to explain it. And so writing is really important. And you're a writer, I know. Writing is so important to refining that story, because there's the spoken word, which is like horizontal thinking, and then there's the written word, which is vertical thinking, where you have to you're forcing yourself to kind of put coherent thoughts together in sentences, and then try to have it like one big idea come out at the bottom. So
100%.
brevity is the word that I would use to describe your story, which the only reason I say that is because it reminds me so much of Hormozy. And I remember showing you Hormozy and you being like obsessed with him at that point. And so he did the exact same thing, right? He started a gym with like $45,000, slept in the gym, yada yada yada. Pretty much got with Layla Hormozy and said, like, what was it, along the lines of like, if I were you, I would leave me, in a way. Is
Yeah,
like,
I remember that.
and she
That was
stuck with him, and
intense.
then they kept growing and growing. And so his story is an emotional transformation,
Hmm.
which moves all of us, right? A lot of us can see. I think to talk about storytelling, and I know you understand this, I'm just going to reiterate it for the audience. Storytelling is the most important part about writing or any communication, because it's ideas within context. And when you just have ideas without context, people are usually confused because it's up to their own interpretation. You
Hmm.
have to tell people what your ideas mean, And a lot of times you have to get them interested in such ridiculous ideas. And how do you do that? Emotionally move them. Okay, well, your first and last sentence, the first thing you say on stage versus the last thing you say, there has to be a big change.
It's the bookends.
So, yes. And I relate to you, dude. Like, yeah, storytelling. I didn't value storytelling. Even when I hopped on that podcast with you, there is the visual storytelling. We've had this conversation time and time and time
Mm-hmm.
again. Um,
Which you are a
even with
phenomenal
like,
artist in that sense, by the way.
uh,
Let's
I love you, brother.
let's
Much
clap it
love.
up for Zach one time.
I think I'm much better at visual storytelling than the com- the communication side of storytelling, which I love watching your short form, and I want you to go into long form more and more and more and more and double down on it because
Okay.
even in that podcast yesterday, I was just listening to it. I'm like, damn, Alex tells a good story. Like he's just so straight to the point, and a lot of the things that you write on short form, which is your scripts, you're capable of doing it both ways, where there's a flow of like spoken word is important because it's almost acting in a way. It's you can't stick to the script too much,
Mm-hmm.
especially like me, you and I sitting here. And I've learned that going through the podcasting phase is if I prepare too much, then it feels inauthentic. If I
Mm-hmm.
don't do any preparation, then it feels like I don't care enough about my guest. So storytelling, we can sit here and talk about that forever.
Oh, dude. Seriously.
There was essentially if someone is interested in learning how to tell a great story, what advice would you offer them?
Oh man, that is a great question, and I am very excited to answer it. Um, One is the most important is learn how to hook people in. And what I like to do, what I've done recently is I've started watching Star Wars and
Really?
it's I've been actually watching a lot of the Mandalorian,
Okay.
and the storytelling in that is phenomenal. I mean, if you look at the episodes in the very beginning as it's always something going on. Somebody's always chasing somebody else. They're always there's always some sort of action that's immediately grabbing your attention and saying, "Hey, watch this." And then there's the resolution, and then there's the bigger idea of the episode, and then it closes off with a cliffhanger. So one is hook people in. Two is learn how to develop tension, which is developing trouble. So, and as you get better at developing trouble, you create you just create more tension that makes people want to watch more.
Like layer,
Like
layer,
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 exactly.
layer.
Like, oh, this happened, then this happened. Like, let's see if I can think of an example off the top. There was an episode where they were searching for Grogu. If you haven't seen The Mandalorian, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to spoil it. And he's trapped in the bad guy's ship, and there are two objectives of the group. One part of the group is looking for the bad guy. The other, the Mandalorian himself, is looking for Grogu. And then the Mandalorian enters into, which that in itself is tension because it's two
Yeah.
different objectives, but they're going in the same direction. But the scene where the Mandalorian opens up the door and he sees the bad guy and Grogu, then that's when you get the tension of like, oh, what's gonna happen next? Because there's going to be some conflict of interest here now between those
Yeah.
two people that are going in the same direction. So that just keeps you watching. So that learning how to hook people, learn how to develop tension, and the best way, the third way I'd say, the best way to develop tension is to learn how to get people to ask questions subconsciously. And the two most fundamental questions that I've noticed are what questions and how questions. What questions tend to keep attention or tend to get attention, excuse me. So, what's going to happen next? Oh my gosh, he just found this. What is it? What's going on? And then once you introduce a problem that needs to be solved, then you get people to keep watching. Then they ask how. Like, how are they going to solve this problem? How are they going to get back to the ship? How are they going to accomplish their goal? And I found that that's actually very effective in short form content as well. So, for example, just the last post that I did yesterday, I said, "Yo, the one of my goals for this page is to create more community." I stated a goal, and then I stated how, and then people were able to engage. That seemed to work, and it seems to work so far with many hook. And you study Dan Coe, so I know you've
Yeah.
seen a lot of
Oh
his
yeah.
like how to do this.
Like
And
negativity
mm-hmm,
biases. What is it? Pains and benefits. Using numbers, right? Like all of that, all the good stuff.
yeah,
I kind of stopped. So like yeah, I did 2 hour rider, but there was I learned a lot through other Twitter writers too in terms of hooking people. But when you start the whole content creation game, you don't value storytelling or the ability to hook as much because for a lot of people, that's like 90%, or how do I put it? That's like 80% of their effort goes into that. And then it's like if you look at it, it's only really like 20% of what you're actually doing,
mm-hmm,
right? It's like so small of a thing that contributes to how much success you have online.
yeah,
And so I'm terrible at it. Like I'll just put this out there. I am absolutely terrible at hook writing. But it's like because I'm aware of that, I can get better at it.
mm-hmm,
It's I don't have a blind spot. Like, oh, why isn't my content doing well? Well, most of the time it's just because you're not engaging your audience to like take the bait, stop the scroll.
mm-hmm,
And so you see that all the time with YouTube, right? Like YouTube's algorithm has changed so severely where I feel like a lot of stuff's just clickbait. Like,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, and there's a lot of good stuff on there too. But honestly, everything you just said about storytelling was in that advice was a story itself, which was it's like layers and layers. I'm like, God damn it, Alex. So, you did a post recently, and it was about how your one of your goals is 150,000 words in 2 years for storytelling through 200 words a day stories. So small stories.
mm-hmm.
So is that like I didn't really I saw it and I was like didn't have the audio on. I was like looking at it. I was like, wow, that hooked me. And I was like, what's your 2 year goal? So it was more how and why are you doing this?
Because that's a great question. How is just doing it every day, just getting my reps in.
Or what like I guess what are you writing about in these
Oh,
stories? Is it your everyday life or is it just like creative writing or is it inspirational writing through like hip hop and whatnot?
it's if for a little bit it was trying to create as much tension as I could, and that's because I had a lot of theories
Such
about
a
it.
such a condensed place, huh? Like
Yeah,
200 words is not a lot, so
no, it's not. So I wanted to see how much tension I could create and try to have every sentence either creating context, getting people to ask what, or getting people to ask how, and condensing that all into 200 words. So it started with that, and then I started hearing that, wow, you have a very like visual way of writing. You see, like when you're reading your stuff, I'm like I can see everything happening, and so now I'm really working on my imagery and descriptions, which has been a lot of fun. It's a lot more poetic, and this type of stories that I'm telling, I don't know, just something like if I saw a show the other day of like whales, I would tell a story about some whales or just whatever's if I'm writing from somewhere incredibly beautiful, I just write a story that could be taken in front of me and like just using a lot of metaphors and things like that. Recently, I've been listening to a lot of synthwave, which has been fun. Um so like
yeah.
Tron stuff, it's so sick. Um so I've been doing kind of writing some synthwave type stories like talking about like hover bikes and glowing pipes and um, cracked iron streets that allow for electromagnetism for things to go super fast. But now everything is hover cars, and there are like lines of hover cars in the sky, and so they're not even using that old technology anymore. So,
Creative writing is wonderful. I mean, and just fiction writing is generally great for developing writing skills. Right? There's not a lot of people who write nonfiction compared to fiction writers. But it's like, what do fiction writers know that nonfiction writers don't? Well, the biggest thing is how to tell a good story out of absolutely nothing. Because there's a lot of nonfiction writing out there that is so boring to read, like anything financial or really analytical, a lot of scientific journals and stuff. Like it's so
mm,
boring to read, right? The writers don't do a good job, but they're experts in their field. So you can tell a good writer based on their ability to hook readers in. That's always the biggest thing. Stephen King, he's so good at doing this, creating the tension, and I think he's wrote like over 300 books, something like that.
wow,
And
I'm not
um,
surprised.
Stephen King has, I think it's a book on like how to write well, and the number one thing he always would discuss is kind of like making the time to write every day. But if you're going to write a book, you need to do it in like 3 months. And I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, you're telling me like all the books this man has written have been in like 12 weeks. Like, boom, okay, push it out. Because if you're not getting it done in that amount of time, then you're losing like a little spark to keep going.
Huh.
And I think there's something to be said about urgency and the idea of mortality in our world, right? Because so many people are. So I'm a productivity coach. Like I've moved into that,
Cool.
and creativity being kind of the background. So with productivity, there's this thing called the efficiency trap, which is the more work you take on, like the more productive you become, the more efficient you become, the more work you take on. And so people are constantly hoping that one day their to-do lists are just not going to exist. But you become more productive in an attempt to get rid of your to-do list and keep yourself busy, but you're not going to get what you want out of being productive. It's just like this constant paradox of my to-do list never ends because I finish everything and then I create more meaningless work for myself. So the idea of productivity actually comes from knowing what you don't want and what you don't want to do. So you
Mm,
can commit more time into doing things you actually want to. Because like there's a lot of things in life that are kind of like they're half interesting. Like they're so seductive in the sense of it'll take away focus and time from what you actually want to achieve, right? So let's say you want to write a book. Well, you're also a music producer and you're also really interested in sewing and you want to sew the world's biggest blanket or knit the world's biggest blanket. Because like knitting the world's biggest blanket is a very time consuming task that takes a lot of, mental energy, physical energy. You're never going to get around to writing that book because it's not like your direct focus.
hmm.
So I think a lot of successful people, they do one thing, or entrepreneurs take one idea and one problem. So one creative solution to a big problem that many people have, and they just solve that one problem and make a ton of money up, rather than trying to solve hundreds of little problems that really don't add up to much.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how I'm going to tie this back in, but if you're writing 150,000 words in 2 years, like that's awesome, right? You're putting the reps in. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it's like, why? Like you're really big on the what. I'm really big on the why. So
Oh yeah.
my questions are not what and how. And I could probably take a lot from you with the what because you're so great at writing hooks and telling stories. In my world, it's the why and the how.
Mm-hmm.
Why am I doing this? Why? Why? Because if I don't have a solid enough why, I won't keep doing it. So, especially if the why is for extrinsic motivation, right? Like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
want money, sex, power, status. A lot of times those aren't big enough whys. They're necessary in order for me to be productive and gain motivation, but they're not powerful enough for the
Yeah.
longevity of the creative act, which leads us into what are you currently obsessed with in this world?
Whew. Currently obsessed with. I mean, aside from storytelling,
Yeah,
um,
that's a foundation at this point.
yeah, communication at large. Um, I really think communication is how we get ideas across to each other, and then communication is also how we solve 90% of the world's problems. That I think that is,
In my recent experiences, I have to agree, man. Like I could
yeah,
not have said that better.
like it's the what and the how to me. It's what we need, and or what we're going to use to convince other people that that is the solution, and how we are going to fix it. So I don't know, man. If I guarantee if we just took time to be put aside our emotions just a little bit more and decided to
Our
focus on
egos.
more of
Yeah.
communication, yeah, and just said, hey, we're all, I mean, as cliche as it is, we are all in this together. And so,
We're
if,
all experiencing life for the
mhm.
first time.
Oh, 100,
So
beautifully said.
communicate. Yes. Yeah.
So,
So communication has to be almost the number one pillar
mm-hmm,
in any relationship we have, because you take away communication, and I've like honestly this has been a lesson that has to be like drilled into my head recently, especially with just like friends, family, just loved ones in general.
mm-hmm,
Like communicate, there has to be an idea of generative drive between you and I. So
mm-hmm,
all you have a relationship with everything in this world, right? Everything in this world. The the water around you, the food you eat, your sleep, like, all the important things for health, and then the people in your life that also contribute to your health. But because we have a relationship with everything, some of them it's not really, there are a lot of bad relationships
mm-hmm,
that we aren't really like we're worried about too much, and we're so focused on what we don't have rather than what we have. And so
mm-hmm.
gratitude plus agency equals pretty much the sum of the generative drive, which is the idea of us contributing to something bigger than ourselves, right? It's
Wow.
like, why do we do things? Like you and I have
Yeah.
an idea of us, right? There's not just Alex and Zach. There is an us when we talk to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, like we could go maybe like, I think I didn't text you back for like 2 weeks straight or something. And I was like, oh shit, I thought I did. Or it was like, oh, I actually just like read it, got distracted, completely forgot about it. But because the idea of us and our friendship is so strong, and this is what a lot of people need to understand, is it's all about forgiveness, to like
Mm-hmm.
it's forgiveness and accountability. Plus you add in agency, like you hopping on the podcast for me, helping me out, doing something that I genuinely need or genuinely appreciate. And then there's gratitude on your side or my side. I'm like, hey, like I'm so grateful that you did this. Thank you, brother. Means a lot. I needed an episode guest. So it's just this balance, and this, it's like a beautiful dance almost. So thank you for getting on the podcast.
Dude, it's right back to the dance. No, I'm playing. Seriously, it's an honor to be here.
It's always dancing with this guy.
I wanna talk about something you brought up too, actually,
Yeah.
about the why. The why I think is also very relevant in storytelling because, like you said, it distills down to what's the most important. Like, what's
Yeah.
the most important thing? What's your why? Why are you doing this? And in storytelling, and you see this in content creation, and I was doing this with my 150,000 words too, is cutting the fluff, get to the point.
Yeah.
Don't be very minimal with it. So the more, and it's tying back into productivity, the more minimal you are and the more clear you are, the more you
Further you
can
go.
the more you can get more done.
Yeah. You can
So,
get more done. You can go further. I There is so much fluff in life, dude. And you don't realize how much fluff is actually in life until you meet somebody who, their ability to be so present and just straight to the point and blunt, that is like you meet someone who's like living in alignment with who they actually are, who they want to be, and then they embody that through action and ideas rather than just kind of this idea of fluffing up the ego to the point where like it's all superficial.
mm-hmm,
And so meeting people who, this has been, I've it's happened a lot to me recently this year, especially starting this podcast, is I've met so many people who they, how do I even put it? They respect me enough to be completely present in the moment. And that is like really like it kind of like just to be a little vulnerable because you got to be strong enough to be gentle. My whole life, dude, my whole life I've been overlooked. Um, Growing up, being an undocumented immigrant in from England, since I moved here when I was 3. Growing up, age 16, everybody's starting to become young adults, get their driver's license, start working, making money.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't do it. I didn't become a resident until I was 19 due to financial reasons, due to the disruptive nature of our government taking forever to get anything done. And so I
Wow,
always
I didn't
felt
know that
overlooked.
till 19.
Yeah,
Till 19.
till 19, dude. And so I always felt overlooked. So like it's almost like a love language to me when people are capable of sitting there and being present with me and looking at me for who I am and what I do. And I always try to convey that back to other people so they don't feel like they're being overlooked by the cheap dopamine, by the bullshit stories that they tell themselves, right? Cuz I think we've talked about it. The One of the most powerful things is like that Tim Ferriss idea where it's like, what is the story I'm telling myself? Or the
Mm-hmm.
story I'm telling myself here is X, Y, and Z. And then it kind of almost forces you to, it's a communication route. Like I can communicate this, but I'm not like so tied to this idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like entertaining an idea without accepting it. Is that what it's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's perfectly said.
Okay.
Perfectly said. But yeah, I mean, dude, there's I was thinking about this story this morning because I was kind of going through my head and I have like a research process that I go through with all my guests. And I mean, dude, I've known you like my research process with you is going inside my noggin and thinking about it. But you've changed a lot, dude. Like, and for the better, right? Like I think we're all changing, some of us for
Mm-hmm.
the better, some of us for the worse. But I remember this one story, and so it was Young Life, Lost Canyon. I think it was
Woo!
2016. It was
Yeah.
this one story, and there was 2 girls specifically, and I remember everybody listening. Alex Lacy at this time, he didn't show anybody that he could dance. It was like the last night, and we're inside like this play area. There's like pool tables, there's food, music, all sorts of like teenage kids, and we're in there at like 16 and 15, and it's just him and I. It's nighttime, right? It was like the last 2 hours before we go to bed, and then everybody leaves in the next morning. And I remember this guy was just he was he was putting on a show, right? And he was attracting some of the girls, and there was well, let's not name names, but there was a brunette and a blonde,
Yep.
and I had a huge crush on this blonde girl, and Alex was just wingmanning it up. His riz back then was the ability to dance and attract a crowd and be like the life of the party. And so I'm just standing there, and I'm just like, "Yeah, that's my boy. That's my dog right there." And so there was attention that came to me. But that summer camp, it was like a week. Was it a week?
uh, yeah, 6 days a week. Yeah.
Yeah. So you remember what I'm talking about,
Oh,
right? Like,
dude,
yeah.
clearly. Yes.
So I think that was like that whole trip was the moment that you and I became friends for life. It was
Oh,
one of those
yeah.
things where it was just there was so many unique experiences that we had, and it brought us closer as like in a sense of brotherhood, right? Because I still see our young life mentor at his coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out the espresso wagon.
Hell yeah.
And I still see him and I chat with him all the time, and it's just it's a they have created a community inside both of us to where now we want to go and create a community ourselves and kind of bring people along and elevate others. So
Wow.
when we think of it, like I look back and I'm like that was probably really good for my subconscious mind is that level of love and fostering community and just the idea of the generative drive serving something bigger than yourself, whether that's God, the universe, whatever you believe in, and being able to do so with brothers and
Mm-hmm.
just learning so much about yourself without with a disconnect without your phone, that it was just wild to see how much it
Yeah.
contributed to our friendship.
Which, by the way, when he means without our phone, we weren't allowed to have our phones during Young
Yeah.
Life like that whole week, which made it like we were actually going out and talking to people. Imagine that.
It was actually really cool.
It
Like
was.
everybody was so interactive, and there was hundreds and hundreds of teenage kids, like girls, boys
Oh man.
of all ages. I think it was like 14 to 18, something like that. And there was so much to do. And one of the funnest things we did was we woke up. You remember this? It was like 3 a.m., 2 a.m., and they gave us like a bunch of like black clothing to put on. And we pretty it was like, was it? I don't think it was raining, was it? I don't think so.
I'm not sure.
You remember the little, it was like a military like course where we
Oh,
had to pull each
dude,
other through.
that was
Yes.
nuts. I
That
completely
was,
forgot about that.
they caught us completely off guard. And so I remember waking up and looking over and everyone's still asleep, but our instructor was like he was like turning the lights on, getting ready, and I was like, what the heck's going on? And I think it was Miguel. I think Miguel was like
Oh,
awake too in the other bunk across from me. And I'm like, what's going on? He's like, dude, I don't know. And then all of a sudden it was like the lights were flashing on. People were going outside. I was like, this is not okay. I just woke up from like, like a 5 hour, what was it? No, 4 hour sleep, something like that. And dude, the confusion that just occurred of like, hey, like you guys are going to pretty much go to boot camp at this point. So we go outside and I just remember kind of being like, "Oh God!" Like we all have, like it's like we all have to make it through.
oh,
Like
dude.
were we tied together? I can't even remember. Were there like things around our waists? No, I don't think.
Oh, there was something. There was
I'm.
something holding us
I
back.
want to remember that moment because it was like it was such a big team building exercise that really you couldn't say no to if you were
Yeah.
a guy. Like they just threw it on you, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't realize I was going to the military." Like
Yeah.
but it was sick because we I think between like six of us we ended up lifting one of our young life mentors up, and he was a heavy guy, and it was like pulling him up, and that was pretty rough, but we made it through.
Yeah. That was so
Shout out
much fun.
Charles.
Shout out Charles, man. Wow.
Yeah, dude, we
You
had like,
told that story well. I will say
thank
that.
you, brother.
Yeah.
I just remember the glory of being finished. And like that was it. Is like once it was
Yep.
done, it was done. We had to climb through or crawl through mud. We did all sorts of crazy
Oh,
stuff.
dude. And I think you're right. I think it might have rained the night before, so like the
Yeah.
entire forest was like pine needles sticking to our like places we didn't even know how they got there. And we're like, we just get back and we're just tracking everything in, and we're like, damn, we probably got
Yeah.
to clean this up tomorrow.
It
But
it was so perfectly clean inside in like the entire thing. And I remember there was like that huge shower where there was like six different shower stalls. We would have to go in, shower. And I just remember waiting and waiting for like my turn to go through there. And I was just like, this is not, I just like showered the night before. I don't want to shower again. And I was like, I can't believe they did that to us. Like they didn't tell us, like no one had their phone. Nobody knew what time it was. It was like we actually just like they forced us to take action. And like if we weren't going to take action, we were going to be out in the cold. Like now that I think of it, that's like it's terrible what they did to us.
that
Oh, we're like,
was a blast.
but I think it made us all a little bit closer, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's those moments where, like I still see some of the guys we did that with just out and about in our
Yeah.
hometown, and like they're distant, right? They're not like super close, but like they just
Yeah.
it's like they know, like we went through some shit going to
Yeah.
that church camp.
That's a good point too that you bring up. It seems like from what I've seen, there's something about struggle that just brings people together.
Oh, absolutely, man. I mean, look at the world in which we live in right now. Like we're in a recession, if not heading towards one that's even worse. And there's chaos, there's war happening overseas. Like people are just living in a state of fear and not
Mm-hmm.
like love and abundance. But what happens is people band together.
Yeah.
And you see that like in family, like the family unit is important in my opinion because those are the people that have your back.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody has that, which you know, sometimes that's just the card you get dealt, but what you do have, you need to focus on rather than what you don't. And this is what
Mm-hmm.
I try to say this a lot because you can get so caught up in the luxurious and the loving lifestyles that people portray online because we've never had an ability to really look into people's lives like we do today. Right? I
Yeah,
feel like it contributes to loneliness, man. Contributes to
100%.
unhappiness and contempt because like comparison is the thief of joy.
It
So
is.
you talk about
Yeah,
loneliness a lot in some of your content.
I do. Part of the reason was I felt a little lonely growing up, but I'm feeling a lot less so now. I don't think there was anybody who didn't feel a little lonely growing up. I don't
Yeah,
think that's exclusive to me. Um,
I think I could agree with that.
yeah, it's part of life, but trying like we are social creatures going back to communication. Like we need to have some sort of connection with others, and I found, and I like that post I'd made. A lot of it was my fault because I was very much a homebody and I was very into what I was into. I always had an independent streak, which I'm happy about. I think that's a good thing. But there is another level. Actually, Stephen Covey talked about this in Seven Habits of Highly Effective People.
Hmm.
He had the framework of there's dependence, there's independence, and then there's interdependence. And interdependence is like, hey, I am working with those around me. It's like a web. It's the whole community aspect. Like we all have a certain skill set. We can all hold our own, but we are so much
Better together. Yeah.
exactly. Just having that community, it's the name of the game, and it seems like we're just losing that more and more. And you can look at social media, you can look at the divisiveness of politics, you can look at whatever factor you want, but that just seems to be the North Star as I look more and more.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people since COVID, right? Everybody's got a COVID story, but I think
Mm,
COVID really contributed to this idea of loneliness, but more prevalent in men than it is in women. You know,
mm,
don't shoot me for that, but I see far more young men experiencing loneliness, especially single, and it's almost like they get stuck in a really negative loop.
mm-hmm.
It's a loop of, well, in today's world, they have access to one, um, you know, millions of girls online that they could see topless,
Yeah,
and that really affects their reward circuitry in their brain. And so they're not people aren't actually like the whole dating scene, like modern dating is kind of wicked in a way. Like I think social media has kind of destroyed like it's opened up options for women. Like it's globalized a lot. The internet's
mm,
globalized a lot. So women constantly have options, have constant like stimulate sexual stimulation. So they both kind of go hand in hand and have like a negative effect where,
yeah,
you know, men are more disposable because there's always another dude, another wallet, another um, you know, another guy in the situation, or and then women are kind of objects. And so we've
yeah,
really disconnected, and social media has like perpetuated a gender war. It's like, oh, I got hurt by a woman. I hate all women now, or men are trash. Kill all men. Like it's so
mm-hmm.
terrible to see because one, there's a lack of communication. It's unhealthy love that they're probably displaying to one another, and two, it's a lack of community. Right?
Yeah,
Like they're when you get like that, you're ostracizing an entirely different energy that is in very crucial to your well-being and mental health because humans are social creatures.
yeah. And just to that point too, uh, there's a biblical idea that talked about how I think it said something about if I see you as a roach, I can only see you as a roach, which basically
Yeah.
talking about if you see people not as people, you're going to treat them as less than. And I mean,
Yes.
there's examples of this throughout history.
Oh yeah.
It,
Absolutely. I mean, there's
so,
examples of this happening right now in today's world.
yeah. I mean,
And
that's when I say
it's
is like
yeah.
if you see another group as not a part of the same species or all of them are just one way, of course you're going to not want to hear anything about what they have to say and not want to change your idea of them at all.
Closed-mindedness.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to be around for me it's hard to be around people with a fixed mindset. I
Mm.
when people aren't when people don't want to grow, they don't want to improve themselves, right? Uh it's hard to have like real communication with them. There needs to be a level of I'm going to set aside my ego, I'm going to set aside my beliefs and I'm just going to be present, listen, and I'm guilty of it. Like
Yeah.
I can be pretty
Oh,
stubborn.
so am
I think
I.
all of
Yeah.
us can. But there's something beautiful about going into a conversation with somebody and like knowing that I can learn something from this person.
Yeah.
Um, I know you're reading The Creative Act. What has been a profound idea that changed the way you think about creativity?
Oh, man. First, I want to give context and say I am a pretty organized person. I like to have things very clear in front of me. Like, what's the goal? How many of this do I need to do? And then create a routine around that. That's just how I like to operate. But that book has shown me that that can be a weakness. Like there is beauty in chaos in just enough. And it's funny you ask me this now because I've kind of developed an idea of like the intermingling between chaos and is order is supposed to facilitate chaos and chaos is also supposed to improve order. So it's basically yin and yang of
Yes.
how because when I think of I'll use my routine for creating music for an example. I had a goal for a while to make 3 beats a day, and so I made a schedule of where I can make that happen. In theory, when you're making music and you're allowing creativity to happen through you, that's a certain level of chaos. You don't really control that. But the routine allows that to happen. And then if it does go over, or if the chaos is pushing in a different direction, then the order can follow that and just make everything more optimal. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
S-
It's you're leaving space. You're
Yeah,
leaving space for creativity to happen, but you're also forcing yourself to practice the craft every single day and get
exactly.
into it's like you want to make it mechanical as possible, just to force yourself out of procrastination, but also you can't just force it. You
Hmm.
can't just hammer it down like this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, like
But
I can't say I'm going to love everything that I make right out the gate. Like every day I'm probably going to make at least one piece of music that I'm like, I'm really not feeling that one. I can't control what I make, and that's just something I have to keep my hands off of. Otherwise, I'm going to be getting super frustrated and it's just going to be awful and I'm not going to have fun, which then I guess emotions are a certain level of chaos as well.
oh,
Um
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
but the emotional state that I have when I'm making this, I need to make sure that I'm having fun. Like if I'm getting frustrated, I'm like, all right, just ease off the pedal a little bit. You're okay. Just move on to the next one. Just finish this one up, move on to the next one. But making sure it's fun, I found is like the very most effective way for me to keep it a sustainable habit.
Mhm. Fun. I like that. My approach is definitely in the book, The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler. Great book if you haven't read it. Talks about pretty much high performers, creativity, flow state.
Yeah,
W-
I've heard good
What
things.
Yes, it's a fantastic book. But what got me was I used to kind of I used to think if I was frustrated with a piece of art that I was creating, a photo, that it wasn't the right direction to go. And so
Mm.
in this book, it pretty much talks about like frustration is an indicator that you're making progress. And so
Oh.
it's a great indicator. And so if you're frustrated with something, that's a good sign to keep going. That's a sign to this is where the art of grit pops through,
Mm.
where you need to be resilient in whatever you're doing because that resilience of just showing up every day contributes to the long-term habit. But even like with our physical health, right? Like how do you cultivate grit? Well, you do smaller versions on your worst days of whatever it is that you want to do every single day, but in just bite-sized chunks, right?
Mhm.
You're eating the frog, but you're eating the smallest frog possible in order to keep the streak going of I did it. I did it. I did it. Check the boxes. And so cultivating grit has been everything that I started doing this year, at least like the last like 6 months, right? Um, I've made it my goal, just like you, to make beats, not making beats, but like something similar, right? Creative endeavor every week, write a newsletter, like a typically 1,000 to 1,400 words every Saturday, and
Wow.
then film a podcast once a week every Tuesday. And so it's been a 3 month goal to do the newsletter. That was what I started with first. Newsletter, 3 month goal. And then let's define the verbiage of what I'm actually doing, how many hours a day I'm doing it, and how many hours a week I'm doing it. And then it's broken down into understanding like, okay, this is a very achievable goal. And even on the weeks where I'm having a terrible week, like life just hits you hard, I'm still consistent with it, but I just lower the volume necessary. Like if I can't do
Mm.
800 to 1,400 words, I'm doing 600 or I'm doing 500. But that way the streak keeps going and it's like nothing's really changed in what I'm doing. But then it's like, okay, I've done it for 3 months straight. This is definitely a lifestyle now.
Mhm.
All of a sudden, it's like on autopilot. Let's move on to the next goal, which is the podcasting. Okay, I've done the podcast for 12 weeks straight. Now it's on autopilot. And now it's just something that's an integral part of my daily and weekly routine. So we're moving into the next phase of this. And I'll just tell you since, we're pretty deep into the podcast, like over an hour. So I don't know who's listening at this point, but what it is the next thing I want to do is short form TikToks and just for virality, not necessarily for depth and substance. So it's like I have a lot of fun doing those, like the fun, right? I have
Yeah.
fun posting those short form videos. And that's really where you get your audience because obviously, if we're writers, speakers, people who want to communicate, who are we communicating to, right? We have the
Yeah.
what, the why, the how, but there's
Mhm.
the who. So who is it, right?
That was so good.
Thank you, man. We're both
That
growing. I
oh
see
dude.
that, dude, and it's awesome to talk like this.
It's so cool. Like the parallels that we have are just, and I mean you put me on. I think I probably wouldn't have taken writing as seriously if it wasn't for you who showed me the Dan Co course.
Yeah,
That seemed to, I don't necessarily follow his format, but he showed me the importance of it and developing your own
he
perspective.
connected the dots. I
Mhm.
think that's what Dan Code does is he connects to the dots for people to understand the bigger picture. But as like this whole year has progressed since that event that we had where we took that, grew, started consuming a bunch of content that was really productive and helpful. Like I almost feel like I'm still in the same spot like a year later, but
Oh.
I'm not, if that makes sense, right? Like it's really hard to measure your own progress because
Mm.
you live with yourself every day. So this is like why when I talk to you, like damn, like he's really been stepping up his game. Like there's this level of competitiveness that we have being from the same hometown and just being buddies for so long that it's like we're sharpening each other's swords through ideation
Iron
and
sharpens
communication.
iron, bro.
Yeah. And so it's just one of those where like I can see how much you've grown. Like it's very obvious. You're very much living in alignment from my perspective. But your perspective may be different, right? And that's kind of all life is, just perspective. But for me, I'm like, I don't think I've grown very much. But like in your perspective, you're maybe
Oh,
like, dude,
dude.
who even is this guy I'm talking to?
No, you've it I've seen you grow a lot. Maybe I just haven't made that as clear as I should have, but dude, it's been phenomenal seeing how much you've like just your thought processes and how you see the world is it's worlds away from where you were.
It's likewise, brother. Like any day of the
Thank
week,
you.
it's likewise. It's it's very much like admiration from afar. It's like
Mhm.
shit. There's Lacy doing his thing again. Um, but yeah, I've really been enjoying this conversation. We're pretty much to the end of. I got like two more questions packed away, so we'll go forth. But musical philosophy, because I know that being a music producer is at the core of who you are. With your background in music production and philosophy, can you share how philosophy influences your music creation process?
Oh man, I love that question. I would have to say that the core of my love for music production is, you guessed it, communication. Because I've found that music is the most, is, if not, it's one of the most, if not the most effective way to communicate. I mean,
Is really interesting.
it's been something that we've been doing since the dawn of time. I mean, the tribal chants, and now we have hooks and lyrics that get repeated.
Yeah.
So it's just something that, yeah, it's really just about communication and storytelling, and storytelling in a way that increases the productivity in terms of increases the productivity in other people's lives, meaning getting people to a better place than where they are. That that is kind of the goal of everything. Like my brand, my music, literally my approach to branding now is it's shifted a lot. I'm sure you've seen.
Oh yeah.
But the direction that I feel really solid now is if I look at just J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, what they're talking about in their lyrics and what how they're talking about what they care about, why don't I just talk about what I care about in content? Like it's all,
Yeah.
if a belief that I've kind of created out of that is content is still an art form. Like short form content, it's used for marketing, it's used to get people to buy stuff. All right.
Mhm.
But it's also a form of art to get people to watch something all the way to the end, and for somebody to come away of saying, "Hey, I found that genuinely valuable." Which a lot of content nowadays, they just have cool editing and pop-ups and things that come across the screen, and that's all good. That's an art form. To me, the difference is between those creators and what I do is I want to help people get to a bit of a better place, whether that's just like through community, but relationally through communication and just trying to facilitate that connection once again.
I think I have another course for you to take if that's the case.
Ooh.
um there it's essentially the transformation. You want to take people from hell to heaven. That's a really great way of thinking about it in my opinion.
Huh.
Is that
Okay.
you want to help them, and like that's all it really is there's givers, there's takers, and there's matchers. This is a Hermosi quote.
I haven't heard this
Givers
one.
givers any day of the week, or even if you get taken advantage of, will still go much further and faster than those who are only takers and matchers, because all it takes is one moment of an experience with another giver, and all of a sudden you're introduced to their network of givers, and your network of givers is now in a part of theirs, right? So
Mm.
it's just give value, give value, give value, give value. And there's a lot of people who have been they've been shitting on Hormozy's like philosophy for business and life
Hmm.
of just provide as much value as possible, and eventually like work, provide value, you know, do what you need to do to be in the right rooms with the right people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the communication and the community building aspect of everything you say is really just like we weren't talking about this like a year, 2 years ago, probably not even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And so the fact that we're both having like a synchronized journey of like this revelation of like, okay, so it's not about us and what we have to say. It's not about us and what we have to write about. It's all about the other person. And so you get caught up in that cycle and it's just like production, creativity, it just explodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's like, hey, I care more about you than I do, the really like mundane and materialistic values of life, right? I
Yeah.
value my friendships more than I value money or
Mm-hmm.
value like my health, right? And then it's just if everybody had that mindset of like love one another, I think the world would be a much greater place. So if you can cultivate that because you want to be
100%.
the change, you want to be the change that you want to see in the world. And so I see that in you. I'm like, he's just embodying himself. And you, I don't know. I think the 2 hour rider course that we took, like I saw when it started like hitting and kicking into your work. But you know where I stand. I'm always like, get on X, dude. Like you need to be over there. You need to be on Twitter. But the calls and you have your own network, right? And so, dude, I am grateful that I got to be along for the journey, even if it's in like the back seat, just kind of watching over the car as you drive forward. Because I don't know, dude, there's not a lot of people I talk to. Like there's a concept of this, and this will be the last thing I say before we end the podcast. But um, there are your day ones. I love this when I learned it. Your day ones, which people who you grew up with, you went to the same school, and then there's your day twos, which are the people you meet as an adult who want to talk about business, health, relationships, growth, and how to improve your life. And those day twos are just as crucial as those day ones.
Ooh.
And so, in a weird way, you're kind of a beautiful mix of both.
Dude, I appreciate that. That means a lot. Seriously. I mean, first of all, I feel the same way, but it's so
Thank you,
true,
man.
man. We've seen each other grow, like not just with our brands, not just with our presence online, but like as people. We've seen we've seen
As
each other
sentient
grow.
beings, man. I watched you go from this dorky kid dancing in middle school under fluorescent lights to being this grown ass man who makes music. So it's a full circle almost.
Dude, likewise. It's been so
We're
amazing
get we're
watching you
getting
grow.
too sentimental, dude. We're getting too
All
sentimental.
right.
Okay, before we end the podcast, Alex, what does creativity mean to you?
Oh
In as
man.
small of a sentence or just a quick, easy, concise.
Oh, that's a bomb. Uh I gotta say, damn. I don't believe we can exist. Short answer, creativity is existence.
Have not got
C-
that one yet.
can I
So
break that down
yeah,
really fast?
yeah,
Okay.
break it down.
So, in a very tangible scientific way, our five senses are connecting us to the world around us. Your ears are listening to this podcast, your hands are doing whatever you're doing, washing dishes, I don't know. Your eyes are looking somewhere else, your nose is smelling the scent of something, your tongue is eating food, just resting in your mouth, I don't know. All of those senses plug us into our external environment, and then without us intending to, they send electrical signals to the brain, creating an image and an experience that we have. So, we are essentially creating our own worlds and creating our own stories around us, which is why I believe storytelling is
Woo!
so important.
That is incredible.
So, I
No, just the
believe
way you broke that down, man. Keep going, keep going.
I believe that alone, our biology is always creating. So we can't really exist without creativity.
Woo! Hot off the press. Well, write that down somewhere, dude. We're gonna transcript this.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
Uh,
planning. I need to.
I love the bars that you drop, my friend. It's as always, it's been a pleasure. For everybody who is listening, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It really helps out the show. It's a zero cost way to support me. And if you're interested in what Alex has to say, a little bit more of his storytelling, those links in the show notes below. Once again, Alex Lacy, music producer, advertising guru, and public speaker, and a dear friend of mine. My day one and my day two in one person. So, anyways, thanks for listening, guys. Alex, anything you want to say to the audience before we cap out?
Man, appreciate what Zach is doing for y'all. I mean, the thoughts that he has are phenomenal. So thank you so much for having me on. And again, thank you for being my day one and day two, bro. It means a lot. All love.
Always much love, bro. It's always love. But anyways, stay creative, my friends. Everybody listening. All right, I'm done recording.
Cool.